June 15, 2022, dawned like any other summer morning in the quiet suburb of Maple Hills. The Evans family home, a two-story colonial with pristine white siding and navy blue shutters, sat peacefully amid manicured lawns and blooming hydrangeas. To passers-by, it was the epitome of suburban bliss, a scene worthy of a magazine cover. But by sunset, that same house would become a crime scene that would haunt the community for years to come. Sarah Evans stood at her kitchen island, carefully packing lunches for her 3 children. Peanut butter and jelly for Emma, age 12, turkey and cheese for Michael, age 9, and a special dinosaur-shaped sandwich for little Thomas, age 4. Each lunchbox contained a handwritten note, a tradition she'd maintained since her oldest started kindergarten. Her husband of 15 years, James Evans, sat at the breakfast table, scrolling through his phone while absently sipping coffee from his world's best dad mug, a Father's Day gift from the kids last year. At 43, James was a successful real estate developer, known throughout Maple Hills for his charm and business acumen. "Don't forget about dinner with the Hendersons tonight," Sarah reminded him, tucking an apple into Michael's lunchbox. James barely looked up from his phone. "Can't make it. Late meeting." Sarah paused, her hand hovering over the counter. It was the 3rd late meeting this week. "You promised the kids," she said softly, conscious of little ears nearby. "Things come up, Sarah. You know how it is." But Sarah did know. She knew more than James realized. 2 weeks earlier, May 31st, 2022, Sarah hadn't meant to look through James's phone. She wasn't that kind of wife. But when his phone kept buzzing at 2 a.m. and he was in the shower, curiosity and concern got the better of her. The text messages from Karen from work told a story that made her stomach churn. "Miss you already. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Attached was a photo that confirmed Sarah's worst fears. Karen wasn't just from work. Karen was the new real estate agent James had hired 3 months ago, the one he'd insisted on mentoring personally. Sarah had put the phone down and retreated to the bathroom, where she dry-heaved into the toilet. 15 years of marriage, 3 beautiful children, and countless shared dreams, all betrayed in a series of text messages. But Sarah didn't confront James that night. Instead, she began to watch and wait, gathering evidence, following leads, and slowly uncovering the full extent of her husband's betrayal. Karen Mitchell was everything Sarah used to be: young, ambitious, and full of energy. At 28, she was 15 years James's junior, with long blonde hair and the kind of confidence that came from never having experienced failure. Sarah had secretly followed them one evening, watching as they met at an upscale restaurant 30 miles from town. She saw how James touched Karen's hand across the table, how they laughed at shared jokes, how they kissed in the parking lot before driving away in separate cars. Each discovery was like a knife to Sarah's heart. But she remained silent, maintaining the facade of the perfect wife and mother. She continued to pack lunches, attend PTA meetings, and host neighborhood barbecues. But inside, something was changing. Sarah found the hotel receipt in James's jacket pocket while doing laundry. The Riverside Inn, room 412, charged to his personal credit card, the same day he'd claimed to be at a construction site inspection. That evening, she called her mother. "Can you take the kids tomorrow night?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. "James and I need to have a serious talk." "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" "It will be, Mom. It will be." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her home office, staring at the family photos on the wall. Pictures of vacations, birthdays, Christmas mornings, moments that now seemed like scenes from someone else's life. She opened her laptop and began to type. "My dearest children, if you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong." After the children left for school, Sarah began her preparations. She called the children's schools and arranged for her mother to pick them up. She cleaned the house meticulously, as she always did on Wednesdays. She even prepared James's favorite dinner, pot roast with roast potatoes. At 2:47 p.m., she received a text from James. "Working late again. Don't wait up." Sarah replied with a simple "okay" and continued her tasks. At 3:30 p.m., she drove to the hardware store 2 towns over. Security cameras would later show her purchasing several items: heavy-duty plastic sheeting, duct tape, cleaning supplies, and a new set of kitchen knives. By 5 p.m., everything was in place. James arrived home later than usual, smelling of expensive perfume and carrying a guilty conscience. He found Sarah sitting at the dining room table, a glass of red wine in front of her, and several papers spread out before her. "We need to talk," she said quietly. James loosened his tie. "Can it wait? I'm exhausted." "Sit down, James." Something in her tone made him comply. As he sat, Sarah pushed the papers toward him. Hotel receipts, credit card statements, screenshots of text messages, and photos taken by a private investigator. "How long?" Sarah asked. "Sarah, I can explain." "How long?" "4 months," he admitted finally. "But it didn't mean anything. She's just young, exciting, not worn down by 15 years of marriage and 3 kids. James reached for her hand. "We can work this out, for the kids. Don't you dare use our children to justify your betrayal." What happened next would be debated by criminal psychologists for years to come. Was it a momentary break from reality, a carefully planned act of revenge, or something darker that had been brewing beneath the surface of their perfect life? The kitchen knife was new, its blade catching the light from the dining room chandelier. Sarah had positioned it carefully under the table, taped to the underside of her chair. "I gave you everything," she whispered. "My youth, my dreams, my whole life." "Sarah, please." The first strike caught James in the chest, the shock in his eyes mirroring her own surprise at how easily the blade slid in. He tried to stand but stumbled, knocking over his chair. "Sarah, stop!" But Sarah wasn't Sarah anymore. She was every betrayed wife, every abandoned mother, every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. When it was over, Sarah stood in her once pristine kitchen, now a scene of horror. James lay still on the floor, the perfect family man revealed as a perfect liar. With mechanical precision, she began to clean. The plastic sheeting she'd placed earlier caught most of the mess. She worked methodically, just as she'd done everything else in her life, with attention to detail and perfect execution. Then she made 3 phone calls. First to her mother, "Can the kids stay another night?" Second to Karen Mitchell, "James wants to meet you at the house. He has something important to tell you." Third, to her lawyer, "I need you to hold on to something for me." Karen Mitchell arrived at the Evans house wearing a red dress and hopeful smile. She'd been thrilled to receive James's message through Sarah, of all people. Perhaps he'd finally decided to leave his wife. Sarah opened the door, still wearing her apron. "James is in the kitchen," she said softly. "He's been waiting for you." Karen stepped inside, her high heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She never saw the blade coming. Officer Tom Rodriguez would later tell reporters it was the most disturbing crime scene he'd encountered in his 20 years on the force. The 911 call came from a neighbor at 7:45 a.m. Martha Wilson, walking her dog, had noticed the Evans' front door standing open. Knowing Sarah's fastidious nature, she found this concerning enough to investigate. The responding officers found Sarah Evans sitting at her dining room table, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. The bodies of James Evans and Karen Mitchell lay in the kitchen, covered with the same plastic sheeting Sarah used to protect her floors when painting. "They're in the kitchen," she told the officers calmly. "I've been waiting for you." The investigation revealed a level of planning that chilled even veteran detectives. Sarah had researched crime scene cleanup techniques, purchased supplies using cash at stores outside her usual shopping area, arranged for the children to be away, written detailed letters to each child explaining her actions, transferred significant assets to trust funds for the children, documented her husband's affair meticulously. Detective Maria Sanchez, lead investigator, would later write in her report, "This was not a crime of passion. This was a meticulously planned execution, carried out with frightening precision." The hardest part came when the children had to be told. Sarah's mother, Linda, had kept them at her house, shielding them from news reports and worried neighbors. Emma, the oldest, understood first. "Mom killed Dad, didn't she?" Michael refused to believe it, insisting there must be some mistake. Little Thomas just asked when he could go home. The children were placed with Linda permanently, their lives forever altered by a single night of violence. The trust funds Sarah had established would ensure their financial security, but no amount of money could replace what they'd lost. Maple Hills struggled to reconcile the Sarah Evans they knew, PTA mom, charity volunteer, neighborhood cookie baker, with the woman who had committed such a brutal act. The community divided into camps, those who condemned her actions absolutely, those who understood but couldn't condone, those who secretly thought James had gotten what he deserved. Local organizations held candlelight vigils. The children's schools brought in counselors. Churches offered special prayers, but nothing could erase the stain of violence that had touched their perfect suburban community. State versus Sarah Evans began 9 months later. The prosecution painted Sarah as a calculating killer who had planned a double murder with cold precision. The defense argued temporary insanity, claiming the trauma of discovering her husband's infidelity had pushed her over the edge. Sarah sat through it all, perfectly composed in modest suits, her hair neatly styled. She showed emotion only once, when Emma testified about finding her father's old World's Best Dad mug in the kitchen cupboard. The evidence was overwhelming. The careful planning, the detailed documentation of the affair, the purchase of murder weapons and cleaning supplies, the premeditated luring of Karen Mitchell to the house. After 4 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict: guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, noting the premeditated nature of the crimes and the impact on 3 innocent children, sentenced Sarah to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah's only statement to the court was brief: "I gave them everything. They left me nothing. Now we're even." Emma Evans, now 17, visits her mother in prison once a month. Michael, 14, refuses to go. Thomas, 9, doesn't remember much about either of his parents, but sometimes asks his grandmother to tell him stories about before. Karen Mitchell's parents established a foundation in her memory, helping young women recognize signs of predatory behavior in workplace relationships. James Evans's real estate company was sold, the proceeds going to the children's trust funds. The house on Maple Street stood empty for 2 years before being demolished. A small park stands there now, with a playground and benches. Local children play there, unaware of the tragedy that once unfolded on that spot. Sarah's letters to her children, held by her lawyer until they turn 18, remain unopened. Emma's 18th birthday approaches, and soon she'll have to decide whether to read her mother's explanation for that terrible night. The letter to Emma begins: "My dearest Emma, by the time you read this, you'll know what I've done. You'll have heard many versions of why, but only I know the true story. It's not a happy story, but it's one you deserve to hear." The Evans case sparked numerous discussions about infidelity and its impact on families, mental health support for betrayed spouses, the role of community in identifying troubled relationships, the impact of trauma on children. Several books were written about the case. A documentary filmmaker approached the family but was turned away. The story became a cautionary tale, discussed in psychology classes and marriage counseling sessions. The real victims, the Evans children, continue to rebuild their lives. Emma excels in school and plans to study psychology in college. Michael threw himself into sports, breaking school records in swimming. Thomas shows artistic talent, drawing pictures that sometimes worry his therapist. Linda, their grandmother, devoted herself to giving them as normal a life as possible. She moved to a new town, enrolled them in new schools, and tried to help them build a life beyond the shadow of their parents' tragic end. Sarah Evans became a model prisoner, teaching GED classes to other inmates and participating in prison counseling programs. She declined all interview requests and rarely spoke about that night, even to her therapist. Her cell contains only one family photo, taken at Thomas's 4th birthday party, 3 months before everything fell apart. In it, they're all smiling, the perfect family in their perfect house, with no idea of the horror to come. As years passed, more details emerged about James Evans's double life. Other affairs spanning the marriage, financial irregularities in his business, a secret phone containing messages from multiple women, plans to leave Sarah for Karen. But none of these revelations changed the fundamental truth. 3 children lost both parents in a single night of violence. Today, the events of June 15, 2022 have become part of Maple Hill's history. New families move in, unaware of the tragedy that once shook their peaceful community. Children play in the park that replaced the Evans home, their laughter a stark contrast to the darkness that once resided there. Sarah Evans will spend the rest of her life in prison, carrying the weight of her actions. Her children grow up carrying their own burdens, of loss, of trauma, of questions that may never be answered. The perfect family in the perfect house became a perfect nightmare, leaving behind a legacy of destruction that spans generations. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters aren't strangers lurking in the shadows, but the darkness that can grow in the hearts of those closest to us. As Emma Evans wrote in her college application essay, "People ask me if I hate my mother for what she did. The truth is more complicated. I hate what happened to our family. I hate that one person's actions destroyed so many lives. But mostly, I hate that love can turn so easily to violence, that trust can become betrayal, and that sometimes the people who should protect us the most are the ones who hurt us the worst."